Could Trump's tariff war lead to China's rise and the U.S. demise? The U.S. is China's second largest export market, and though Beijing says no one wins a trade war, others say Donald Trump is unintentionally pushing China to become the global power. So will nations realign to put China in the lead while the U.S. loses markets and allies? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmakers are the U.S. and China. Well, Donald Trump couldn't be more confident about his tariff strategy serving to make America great again. But a huge number of economists are warning it's a gamble that could backfire. And some say if China plays its cards right, it's Beijing who will come out on top. Now, China is a leading manufacturer of green technology, electric vehicles, AI, and of course, consumer products. And now that the U.S. is alienating its traditional allies, could other consumers, not least China's own, pick up the slack? Here's a look at whether China could turn Trump's tariff war against him.
The full-blown trade war between the US and China shows no sign of ending. President Donald Trump put a hold on massive tariffs on most countries, but not China. Chinese goods now face 145% US levies. The White House says the ball is in China's court.
China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer.
While countries rushed to negotiate trade deals with the US, China stood firm and retaliated with 125% tariffs on US goods. It says there is no winner in a trade war.
China does not want to fight, but it is not afraid to fight. If the US really wants to resolve the issue through dialogue and negotiation, it should stop exerting extreme pressure, stop threatening and blackmailing, and talk to China on the basis of equality, respect, and mutual benefit.
With the US being China's second biggest export market after ASEAN, Washington suffers a trade deficit approaching $300 billion. No other single country buys more from China than the US, but even then, exports to the US amount to just 3% of China's GDP. And China's economy is doing well. On Wednesday, Beijing announced its economy grew at a rate of 5.4% in the first quarter of 2025.
In the short term, the imposition of high tariffs by the United States will put certain pressures on our country's foreign trade and economy. But it will not change the general trend that China's economy will continue to improve in the long run. China's economy has a stable foundation, strong resilience, and great potential.
For the US, most analysts believe the high tariffs will feed through to higher inflation. That could also hit the US labor market, creating more unemployment. But Trump remains confident in his policy.
We're the greatest economic power in the world if we're smart. If we're not smart, we're going to hurt our country very badly. We lost with China over the Biden years trillions of dollars on trade. Trillions of dollars. And he let them fleece us.
But it's President Trump who has folded first, at least partially. This week, he made the first concession by announcing tariff exemptions on smartphones, computers, and other electronics entering from China. And those are the largest items in US imports. China also has financial leverage against the US. Beijing is the second largest holder of US debt with $1 trillion. And should it sell those bonds quickly, it could trigger not just US, but global economic turmoil. On top of that, China is ahead of the US in the production of electric vehicles, solar panels, and robotics, all industries of the future. It also controls 61% of the world's rare earth minerals, which are crucial in military technology, the chip industry, and many other high-tech products.
The challenge is not so much knowing the deposits where they are, it's the energy, the water, the technology especially, and that's where China has invested for a long time. And can do it much more cheaply than the rest of the world. And so hence they've been able to develop their 90% control of refining of rare earth.
Both superpowers want to come out on top. But while the trade war continues, global markets are suffering. The medium-term consequences of this standoff are complicated and hard to predict. But as it stands, both sides believe they have the stronger hand.
So there is a lot that could go right or wrong for China in Trump's declared trade war. So joining me now to talk more about where it's all going are from Virginia, adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University and former U.S. diplomat Donald N. Jensen. From Chicago, editor-in-chief of Econ View, Lyric Hughes-Hale, and from Beijing, senior fellow at the Taiyeh Institute and chairperson of Asian Narratives, Einar Tangen. Thank you all so much for being with me. Einar, I'll let you begin and tell us why you're pretty sure Trump's approach here is actually going to make China stronger. Why?
Well, quite frankly, it's a bluff. He doesn't have the political capital to inflict the kind of pain that he is doing on the American public who elected him not to increase prices, but to decrease them, especially the people who voted for him. They're at the lower end of the economic scale. So we're talking about a non-entity here. He is already trying to backtrack. Beijing has left a paper trail that he can follow to talk about a phase two as a way of just these two countries getting along until he is, in fact, finished off either by the midterms or the next election.
Okay, so Donald, I mean, you also don't think necessarily that Trump is in the right here, but correct me if I'm wrong, I also get the feeling you don't think China is going to really benefit from this and become a stronger nation for it.
Well, I agree partly with what the previous speaker said. And of course, talking about Trump in a neutral way is not easy. But let me say this, which is to say that both countries are competing in an international environment that is very, very rapidly changing. The fact that the U.S. helped create that environment 2 generations ago does not overturn the fact that Trump seems to be wanting to change it. I agree that and the tactical level at the moment, the Chinese have the more cards, the more powerful cards, but we just have to see how that works out. The polls show that most Americans want to give Trump a chance for his protectionism, for the other policies he's initiated, and I think there's time for him to do that. I do agree that the 2026 elections will be a turning point. If Trump wants to overhaul the U.S. approach to trade, he's got to do it now. He doesn't have, frankly, all that much time. And we all see everywhere we look here in the United States, the beginnings of opposition. I won't call it the deep state. Let's say the system to some of the things he's trying to do. And the final point I would make is that they, meaning the White House, are not great at messaging on Russia, on other issues, on China. There's 5 different messages coming out from 5 different people, and that does not help the Trump administration make its sale to the American people. And frankly, it means a lot of people think that America is declining. I'm not sure that's the case. In fact, I doubt in many ways that it is. But that's the problem for the Trump people. They came out swinging. They've only been in power 3 months. They make a lot of mistakes, especially on messaging, also on policy. And the Chinese are much more clever. They're adjusting to each blow, if you think of a boxing match. And that, for the time being, I think, gives the perception that the Chinese are winning. We'll have to see at the end of the day.
Okay.
Or at least by
just very quickly, Donald, I mean, can you define, you said, right now China holds the more powerful cards. Which cards are you talking about?
Well, in particular, China's immense and impressive and manufacturing sector, its incredible high-tech sector. If you want to move American manufacturing home, you've got to somehow deal with the fact that the supply chains go to a lot of other countries, most especially China. And that, to me, is a fundamental problem with the Trump approach.
Okay. You know what, Lyric, I'm coming to you in just a second, but Einar, I have to come back to you because it looked like you were disagreeing about what Donald was saying, things changing.
Some of it.
For Einar, disagreeing that. Einar, disagreeing with what you were shaking your head at, with Donald talking about what could change at the midterms. You don't think that's going to be a fundamental point for political change in the U.S.?
No, I do think that'll be a fundamental change. But this idea that we're going to wait and see and, give him a chance, he just doesn't have the time. You're talking about trillions of dollars in investment, giving businesses the sense of, certainty that Donald Trump's policies are going to continue. None of that's true. He doesn't have the time. People do not have confidence. You can see the street, you can see everything, and there just isn't enough time. I was chair of my state's International Trade Council. I can tell you, building factories is not easy in the U.S. Even if he gets rid of all the obstacles and funny little things like ecological statements and things like that, local planning will trump literally play on words, any kind of thing. So I don't agree with this kind of idea that America is, I don't think it's finished at all, but it does emerge weaker from this, and there's less trust of the United States. So this stuff is not, it's not a wait and see game. We can see what the cards are, and quite clearly the U.S. doesn't have them.
Okay, Lyric, let me come to you now quickly, though. If the ball is now in China's court, as the Trump administration says, what should Beijing be doing?
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, I think the obvious thing is to return Donald Trump's phone call. He's asked Xi Jinping to call him, and I think that eventually will happen. But I agree with both previous speakers that there is a sense of urgency, and I don't think that has directly to do with China. It has to do with U.S. debt and interest rates. There's a whole group of things that have happened to make, including the upcoming midterms, where the Trump administration thinks that they have to act very quickly. So I wanted to back up a little bit and give a little historical perspective here. When I first went to China in 1979, China didn't matter in world trade. China was a zero factor. And the fact that China's system is fundamentally different than the American or the European system also didn't matter. But as time went by, China didn't make the kind of adjustments it needed to be truly part of the international trading system as we know it today. So back in 2013, when Xi Jinping took power, China was at its height right then and could have done a lot to enact reforms. Instead, Xi Jinping decided to pull back into the communist doctrines, and reforms ended. So now Trump is in the exact same position that Xi Jinping was in 2013. He has an America that is very strong economically, and he has the support. Don't forget, there's two Americas. He has the full support of his base to take whatever pain is necessary in order to make these changes happen. So the tariffs have been weaponized, but it's not just about economic security, it's about national security. And there are a lot of issues with, for example, hacking of US government websites and infrastructure and so forth that are causing real concerns here in the United States. So I think it's a combination of there's a political moment here where Donald Trump feels that he has the ability to make the reforms within the government and within the international trading system to make America even stronger than it is. And when you're talking about cards, the cards, manufacturing can change. I think the warning was COVID, that we needed to change our supply chains, and American companies did not heed that warning. And now this is a shock to them. The tariffs are a shock. And because of AI and robotization, I think you're going to see an incredible, almost wartime kind of mobilization of American manufacturing ability. And let's not forget that 75 nations have already been talking to the United States about creating a kind of new trading zone that does not include China. So I think this is a perilous time for China. We have the consumers, we have the buyers. China's consumption has not recovered since COVID.
Okay, but let me ask Donald that then, because I mean, we have Lyric saying that Trump has the full support of his base, but if really the U.S. consumer, starts to lose, because it is going to take some time, as Einar was saying, if possible at all, to move manufacturing over to the U.S., People are saying, some analysts at least, that it's China's consumers that can actually compensate for the loss of the U.S. market, as well as even Europeans and others who now want to see the U.S. alienated because of that loss of trust.
Well, I think that's very much true. Let me make one clarification to a point I made earlier, which is that I'm not personally giving him some time. I think the voters are, but this domestic dimension is incredibly important to what is going on. As Lyric said, he only has the support of half of the American people. The other half is giving him that chance. The other half is taking a wait and see for the moment, and I personally don't think they're going to wait very long. There's the parallel phenomenon at home, which has a foreign policy effect as well, which is to say that Trump's approach to all these policies is straining the system. The courts, the Congress have been relatively quiet, but they are beginning to push back. And so we're getting that's not to say a crisis, but a strain on the institutions, political, regulatory, that have governed American policy for so long. This is a potential problem. And as we see with Harvard, with other examples all over the place, people are starting to stand up and push back. And this will be a drag on what Trump wants to accomplish.
Okay. Einar, while you believe China can come out ahead with this, I have to ask you how much you think China really does have to worry, though, more about the small and medium-sized manufacturers in China that are really selling the consumer products to the likes of Walmart and to Target, and they are going to lose their business. Like it will take time to build the manufacturing in the U.S., it's going to take time for these factories to find new customers abroad, if they even can.
Yeah, Andrew, you're absolutely right. And, the Chinese government and the facts show that there's going to be tremendous hardship in China, but nowhere near the hardship in the United States. Lyric put forward the case that, Washington's bully tactics are all good, and this is all wonderful. It'll all kind of work out. But, this idea that Washington can solve its domestic problems by extracting value, land, and resources from other countries, it's naive. It's kind of this neo-colonial sense of American exceptionalist entitlement, this idea that the U.S. deserves all this. Why? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of countries around the world who are wondering why they're being punished, including the penguins, because Washington feels that it is, in fact, the victim here. When you don't have enough to eat and you kind of hear that you've been terrorizing the United States and taking advantage of it, I don't think it goes very far. So you have to look at how the rest of the world is looking at this. Beijing believes that its domestic problems can only be solved through, its values. And they may be different from the U.S. They want to have safety and things like this, and they believe that there should be a larger social net and planning, making sure that these things can actually happen. So, in terms of external relations, while China protects what it believes is its territory, absolutely, it prioritizes trade over conquest. It has a different sense of history than Washington.
Okay, let me come back. Okay, Lyric, go ahead.
Well, I think what will happen is that it's very hard to find new customers. It's much easier to cut prices to your current customers. And I think that's what's going to happen because of the tremendous overproduction that exists in China. I believe that the local small and medium-sized businesses that you mentioned in China, in order to stay alive and perhaps with some assistance from the government, will lower prices. I think that thinking from the point of view of an economist, I do not think that the inflation shock in the United States will last very long. The same as with COVID. I think there'll be an initial shock, but it will not persist because of the needs of the Chinese manufacturers to make a deal.
I know you don't think that's true.
Oh, I'd like to ask my Lyric what she thinks the return on a Chinese company is. Their margin is somewhere between 3% and 7%. All right. So you tell me how they can absorb 89% cost increases. I mean, as an economist, you have to look at the figures. You can't just kind of project, I think things will fall. How will they fall? You have the price of materials. You have the price of labor. You have logistics. How is that going to work exactly? Are you going to make money out of losing money?
China is a communist country. all means of manufacturing is controlled ultimately by its government, is
You
owned
don't understand
ultimately by the
anything about the
government.
United States. You do not understand anything about China. If you think that China is far
I think I'll
more
leave it at that.
capitalistic.
Yeah.
Yes, far more capitalistic than the U.S.
Well, then why don't you ask Jack Ma if he believes that?
Well,
Chinese
he just
companies
spoke, and
consistently, right?
he
Because he
just
had
spoke
to.
in favor of against the United States and in favor of China's model.
I
So
think, yeah.
you know,
I think we could have another debate on that topic entirely. But
Right.
let me ask Lyric, though, as an economist, because much has been
Right.
said now about China actually using the U.S. debt that it holds to somehow retaliate here. So in the end, I don't know, would a weakening of the U.S. dollar benefit or hurt China? And will, the U.S. pay if the dollar is no longer considered a kind of safe haven?
Well, our Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is the Treasury Secretary who is most understanding of currency issues that we've ever had. That's what he dealt with during his professional career. So I think what will happen is that China, as looks like it's happening now, will slowly devalue the yuan in order to remain competitive. So I think that's what will happen.
Okay.
That's yeah.
I get Einar, very quickly. Why is that? Why do you think that's wrong?
Okay. So Trump's whole plan is that he wants to somehow get manufacturing by the U.S. and then he wants to devalue the dollar so that the U.S. is more competitive. Lyric, you've just said that the yuan is going to devalue. How can the dollar devalue more than the yuan under the scenario you've just laid out?
It's a global issue. Currencies are global. It's not just the U.S. and China. It's other nations as well. So you have to look at the euro,
why is China
the
being
yen.
singled out? Doesn't make sense.
I think that, as I said, I think it's a collision of two different systems that is playing out in front of us. And I think, and I'm a believer in the American system. And I think that innovation, the kind of things that the open and free society that we have, whereas in China right now, if you have a social credit score and it's not good, you can't fill your gas tank.
It's not true.
At the gas station. Oh, it's
That's not true.
True.
I mean,
Also,
it is not
let's
documented,
look at this.
and you're just repeating
Okay.
stuff you read off the internet, and you obviously haven't been to
Okay.
China in a long, long time.
Well, here's the issue. Look
I
at the
live here.
figures. Look at the figure, and you're very dominated by the what's going on there. But the FDI to China, what is FDI to China now? Zero. It's foreign direct investment into China, the capital, the technology is not going there anymore. That's the fact.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I want to get Donald back into the conversation and ask about something more specifically geared toward the U.S. and how the local market might be affected by what Trump is doing in this strategy. So we have China now canceling the delivery of dozens of Boeing jets. And Boeing, as you know, is a U.S. industrial champion that's actually really struggling right now. How much could that alone just illustrate China's value as an importer as well of U.S. goods, and potentially how vulnerable the United States really is to China without quite realizing that it's just about imports coming from China to the U.S.?
Well, I very much agree with your point. I mentioned supply chains earlier. I also mentioned, I should mention the examination of the Pentagon defense budget, the so-called military-industrial complex, which is heavily dependent on for external imports from all other countries, including China. The U.S. is considering canceling weapons systems, trying to reorient its defense posture to new threats as it sees them. And that, again, is another strain on the Trump administration, trying to deal with all these challenges at once. I'm frankly skeptical that it can be done, and especially within the time frame we've been talking about this morning.
Okay, Donald, I'll tell you what, we're down to our last few minutes. So overall, I mean, in Trump's approach here, he really sees all of this global trade as a zero-sum game, that there's no such thing for him as win-win, which most of the world would like to define global trade as being. He only wins, he thinks, if everyone else loses. Is that in itself dangerous? alone in
Well,
addressing how global trade should function?
I think it very much is. To use the old adage, he tends to bring his China, he's a bull who brings his China shop around with him. And so that always presents what we've seen, the capacity for abrupt change, the capacity to have mixed messages by the administration, no matter how sound you think some of the policies are. But if I can mention a more deeper question here, which is that the topic of our conversation is America's demise, and to some extent that is built on perception and imaging, and frankly soft power. And what really troubles me is that beyond the dimension of economics, which my two expert colleagues here have been talking about, I'm very troubled by the let's say the de-emphasis of soft power in American foreign policy, which has an economic dimension as well. China has never been especially good at it, and now America seems to be stumbling. And for me, that's quite worrying because, Andrew, the perception of equity and success is part of the formula for success. And that's why I think the Trump administration is really taking some chances here.
Okay. Donald, that will have to be the final word. Very unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. As always, I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.